and an agony aunt and an author. We tried to narrow down her job title, but that was as few words as we could get it into. So we're giving her all three. And we've also got family solicitor Tamara Glanvill from Woolley and Co, who are supporting us with running this event tonight. So Tamara's going to be around to answer some questions a bit later on. I think we're going to be around for about an hour. Susie's going to chat through some things. We've got the presentation loaded up and ready to go, and then yeah, they'll both be around to answer any questions that you might have. And do feel free to ask questions along the way. Don't feel you need to wait until the end. We're very happy for you to interact. We want you to interact. We'd like it to be lively. And there's only a few of us here, so we can give you quite a bit of attention, hopefully. Anyway, I will stop yammering for a moment and hand over to Tamara just to give you a brief introduction on who she is and why she's here.
Oh, hello everybody. I'm Tamara Glanvill. I'm a family solicitor. I deal with a lot of couples in the throes of marriage breakdown, and when things are very difficult. One of the issues is very often around children and introduction to new step parents or new partners. So I hope that I can give you useful guidance about how the law stands in that respect. I'm also a child of a step family, so I have some experience myself. But any questions as you go along, please feel free to ask, and I'll be around all the time to answer anything at the end as well. Okay.
Thanks, Tamara. And yeah, it's really interesting actually. We were just having a chat before we opened up the room, and we discovered that all three of us are members of step families. So it's very common. I'm going to hand you over to Susie now for the main presentation, which is going to be about 30 or 40 minutes, I think, and then we'll open it up to questions. But as I said, do ask questions along the way. Do feel free to butt in. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks, Tamara. Yes, hello. Susie Hayman, Agony Aunt of Woman magazine, and the author of quite a few books on families, but also on step families. But interesting enough, I mean, as you've just heard, we realised that we are all members of step families in our various ways. It is so very common, and I know when I did my Relate training, I realised how incredibly common it was. And this was about 10, 15 years ago, and in those days they didn't actually do much training in Relate training on step families because they hadn't quite caught up with the fact of how common it is. When I talk to people, when I look at the letters that I get, when I look at the interactions we have on Family Lives on our website, people coming in on the forums, people ringing on the helplines, step family issues come up so often. And I think one of the things that's important to say perhaps is that in a lot of ways, step families and families, we're all the same. Families come in all shapes and sizes. Step families are one of those shapes and sizes, but there's so many similarities. Families are people living together who care for each other and try and do the best they can for each other. And you know, whether you're actually linked by blood, as it were, doesn't necessarily, you know, make that happen or not make that happen. But there is, you know, while there are similarities between step families and families, I think there are certain key differences. And when you're having problems, I mean, I get a lot of letters from people who are basically saying, you know, we're having issues here. Is it because we're a step family? And actually looking between the lines, you can say, no, it's just because they're teenagers or they're toddlers. It's nothing to do with the step family bit. But sometimes people don't quite realize that the issues they're having are not about them and they're not about the people they're with. It is about the step family form, about, you know, about step families, about being in that situation that's causing the problems. And I think therefore it's really important to actually look at what are the differences and how they may affect you. So to look at right from the beginning, I think it's worth keeping in the back of your mind that a step family is always rising from the ashes, as I call it. You wouldn't be there in your step family if something hadn't happened. There's been a loss somewhere. Somebody's died, a relationship has died, people have gone, something's happened there to put you in that situation. And while, you know, the adults involved may be quite happy about this, the children very seldom are. But that's the point. You're not starting with a totally blank sheet, a totally, you know, clear slate. And I think that's worth keeping in mind. It can be, of course, a second chance. I mean, I've seen so many occasions where people have done so much better in their second family and actually gone back and done so much better in their original family because of finding themselves in a step family and realizing, I didn't do so well there. I'm going to do better this time, or I'm going to actually go and make redress. So there's a lot of upsides to this second chance, but you have to, as I said, keep in mind the other issues. And what those often set up is unfinished business and baggage. In other words, however a family ends, you're always left with unfinished business. You might be left with an argument. You might be left with feeling you didn't have closure. You didn't say what you wanted to say, and that can, keep rumbling on. Or you really feel that there was something that didn't happen that you would have liked to have happened. Arguments are sort of left in midair. People are left, particularly after a death, for instance. But even when it's an argument and a divorce, you're still left with that unfinished business. And the point about it is that we so often feel that if you ignore that, somehow it'll go away. It is the classic brushing things under the carpet. But as I always say, you brush stuff under the carpet, it just forms a bump, and you'll keep tripping over it. You cannot get rid of that unfinished business by ignoring it. It has to be looked at. It has to be addressed. And I think that one of the bits of the unfinished business then is what I would call different agendas. I've already mentioned that somehow, when you have that loss, when you have an ending, for some people in there, well, it's their choice and it's a good thing. So for the adults in a step family, it's often it's a new life, it's a new beginning. Whoopee, we've got rid of that relationship that wasn't working. We're now in a wonderful new relationship. This is forging forward. This is starting. Children are standing there and they're saying, this is the nail in the coffin of our original family. This is an ending of our old and familiar life. This is an end, not a beginning. And that clash can absolutely get you head on, because frequently adults think, well, why are these children being so awful? This is wonderful. We're having a new beginning, a new start. We're happy. We used to have all these arguments and they're not happening anymore. We might be having a big celebration. I mean, I can remember actually receiving a letter from somebody who was so upset that at the wedding, the children beforehand had been really keen on this. Oh, this is wonderful. We're going to have a big celebration. We can have, we're going to be bridesmaids. There's 2 little girls. We can be bridesmaids. On the day, of course, they dissolved into tears and tantrums. And the stepfather was writing to me saying, oh, they ruined the day and this was awful and why did they do that? And I had to sort of explain to him very carefully, can you not step into their shoes and see that for you it was this wonderful celebration? What they finally had to face up to was the fact that their dad was gone and you were there. And however lovely you are, and even however awful their dad was, the point is that it's the end of their family, and they see this as a tragedy and something that they, quite apart from anything else, they didn't choose. And I'm going to sort of talk about the question of choice and control later on, but it's not their choice, it's your choice. What also happens, of course, when you get a new step family is that you're going to get some movement. Somebody moves out, somebody moves in. The family may move to a different place. Again, this can be seen as a really positive thing by the adults concerned. It's a fresh start. They may look at their children and think, well, you're going to have new friends, new school. This is again a very positive. It's putting aside, putting behind us all the things that perhaps weren't working and were associated with the misery that we've had and the conflicts that we've had. But support networks may go. And this can be just, but children can just find a neighbor that they can, when they walk out of the house, there's a neighbor there that they know and say hello to. That can be really important to them. That can be seen as a tremendous loss. Moving school can be devastating. You may not quite realize how important their friends are to even very small children, but they can find that uprooting, really confusing. And it can make them not just unhappy, but also very angry. And again, we'll look at that in a few minutes. So how that actually can play out. But what I often see is something that I call the package deal, which is sometimes what happens is that 2 adults get together, and the adult who's coming into the family the adult who is not necessarily bringing their own children, is focusing on the person, the adult that they've fallen in love with. What they're seeing is that they are forming a relationship. Yeah, there are children, but that's sort of rather by the by. Point is that you can't cherry pick. If there are children, you are not falling in love with an adult on their own. Even if those children don't live with you, even if those children come occasionally, actually, even if those children never actually come and see you, the point is that they are still a part of one of those adults' lives, and an important part. They're there. And either of you trying to ignore this fact can actually set you up for tremendous problems, guilt, anger, but real upset on part of the children. And of course, that again can come back and bite you, particularly if these are children who are living with you or are going to come and see you a lot. And I think that's one of the most important things. Again, it's a letter that I often get from people, which is, effectively saying, I have a partner and there are children, and can I just ignore them, or can I ask him to not see them as often? If that is your feeling, that you don't want the children part of it, if you can't see this as a relationship where it's adult and children as well, then to be perfectly honest, I don't think you should be in it, because you're going to make life very unhappy for yourself and your partner, and certainly those children. And that's a really difficult situation. It's something that has to be recognized and has to be grasped. Because adults can divorce, but children can't. When you think about it, when you have an adult relationship, you've had a life. You've had quite a lot of growing up, experiencing, knowing people, having all sorts of things in your background that goes on before the person you fall in love with comes on the scene, which means you have, in a sense, a concept of life without them. You can go on without them because you have had life without them before. And that's why divorce, as it were, is possible, because you're ending a part of your life rather than the whole of it. For children, you're talking about not just the whole of their life, but half of them. Whether they've done genetics in school or not, children know that an adult, that they are made up of something from their one adult, their parent, and something from the other parent. They are the sum, as it were, of their two parents. In other words, half of them is the parent who is leaving. And that can set up all sorts of problems that we could talk about later on. I mean, real issues about people wanting almost to follow in the pattern of a parent, even if they don't like what the parent does or is. The point is that children can't actually excise this person from their life. They've been there right from the beginning. They are part of them. When you're looking at divorce, it's an adult solution to an adult problem. It's not something you can ask your children to do. And as a part of that, I mean, if you're talking about, how we recognize what our real emotions are and what they are, and as I said, you can divorce the child, the adult. It's difficult to divorce a child, and a child certainly can't divorce their parent. What we also, I think, need to recognize is that it's natural instincts not to look at another person's child as your own. And again, I get so many letters from people struggling with guilt about this, actually saying, I feel awful that I cannot love this child. What's wrong with me? Or, more often, what's wrong with the child? When you can't make that connection and you feel you ought to, it's quite human nature to start finding explanations for it, and actually to blame the child, to think, well, maybe the child is evil, maybe the child is working against me, something wrong with this child, and that's why I don't like them and I can't love them. Actually, that's natural instincts. I mean, if you think about lions, when a new lion comes in and takes over a pride, the first thing he does is kill all the children of the females he's taking over. Well, we're not quite that bad. Although I think sometimes we feel we'd like to do that, but it is instinctive and natural actually to feel this is not my child, and I don't want this child. However, just because it's instinctive doesn't mean to say that that's how we should go. We are human beings and we can think our way around it. But I think what I'm saying here is that I think you should forgive yourself for not initially, you fall in love with an adult, for not falling in love with their children. That is forgivable. That is understandable. What you then work towards is what you do about it. And we'll talk about that a bit later. One of the saddest aspects, I think, of divorce and separation when there are children is this particular figure, which is 1 in 2 fathers lose touch with their children within 2 years. that very short time of that separation. And the reason it happens is, I'm certainly not going to jump on the bandwagon, and I certainly would not like you to jump on the bandwagon assuming this is deadbeat fathers who don't love their children. It really isn't. Very, very few fathers do not love their children. They may not have, because of the way society has brought them up, because of the pressures that are there, they may not have spent as much time with and have as good a connection with their children as they would like. But once they lose them, I mean, it is interesting that there are very, very many divorced parents, fathers who, when they lose touch with their children, only at that point realize what they have lost and really want to make good and do something about it. But so much works against them and it. And one of those is the pain and guilt that often comes up when fathers see their children when they're separated. Children often do act up around that particular period. Now, Jimmy, you're saying, does that mean permanently? Yes, it does mean permanently. Does it mean, Jimmy's just asked, does it, losing touch, does it mean permanently? Yes, there are occasions, obviously, when fathers get back in touch or children go chasing their fathers. But the figures that the research that I've seen is that there is a separation, which certainly for the children's childhood maintains. 1 in 2, hell of a lot. Mind you, I have to say that probably is not the most recent study. It's probably a few years old. And I also have to say that I think in the last 10 years, certainly, fathers are much more in touch with their children, much more part of bringing up their children, and therefore probably less inclined to lose touch. But when you look at the reasons why it happens, and it's not, as I said, because fathers don't love their kids, it's often because of barriers, because there's so much anger between the separating couple that they find it difficult really to connect and cooperate. And mothers may feel that they have a right to take out their feelings on this man, losing touch with the fact that actually it's the children who suffer worse. But there's also the actual guilt. I've spoken to many fathers who say that what really hurt them is every time they'd see their child towards the end of the period, the child would start getting fractious and unhappy, and maybe have a tantrum. And so that the impression the parent was getting, the father was getting, was they don't love me, they don't want to be with me, I only upset them. And I've had many fathers who say that they did step away, particularly when their ex-partners had a new relationship, because they felt, well, I'll leave them, they'll be much happier in that family if I'm not around to muddy the waters and be another father. But the problem is that losing contact with a parent for children is always devastating. It leaves a hole in the child's life, in their heart, even when, and this is actually quite interesting and I think quite important, even when there has actually been a bad relationship between father and child, even when the father has not behaved very well, children still blame themselves. They think of themselves as being unworthy. They feel, I must have done something wrong, that my father doesn't want to be in contact with me. They feel bad about it, and they do miss the parent. What they do about it often actually is to act up. But it's that losing contact thing about it always being devastating. I think it's important that however much you might think the process of being in touch is difficult and hard, actually the results of not being in touch are actually much more devastating. And how this comes out often is in bad behavior. Now, I've sort of mentioned already that, and I think Susie's, Tamara's saying there that there's been an improvement in the statistics. People are more aware of what they can do. So I think it's actually going to be a lot better. I think that's a bit of a scare thing I've thrown in there. But I think the important thing is it really rather focuses on what some of the difficulties are, that parents and children can clash over keeping in touch. And let's focus on why and what we can do about it. Because to me, one of the most important things is it's about the loss of control that children feel when a family breaks up. They have no choice. I've already mentioned it's an adult solution to an adult problem. it's about you and your ex-partner finding that you don't love each other anymore and you cannot live together, and your feeling is, well, the best way is to part. And in a sense, I say that's fair enough. That probably is the best thing for you, and in a lot of cases, actually, it's probably the best thing for children, because growing up in a warring family is pretty devastating. But children don't have that choice, and actually, if you talk to a lot of children, they will often say, even if even if it's bad, and I want my mum and dad to be happy, but I'd still rather they stay together. Their choice would be that you fix it rather than you end it, that you try and address what's the problem, but stay together. They would far rather you stayed together, even in the most extraordinary ways. I mean, I remember my own stepson once saying, why couldn't we all live together? Why couldn't his mum and my husband and I all live in the same house together? Because we were the three people bringing him up whom he loved. And he saw that as a perfect solution. And of course, it would have been a perfect solution for him. Not sure it would have been a perfect solution for us. But, that was his way of looking at it and hoping that he could do it. That lack of control that children feel often means that they don't have a voice. They can't say to you, this is not what I want. I wish you weren't doing it. And even if they did say it, it's not actually probably going to have any effect. No, the three of us didn't move into, well, four of us didn't move into a house together. What they do instead is they act out. They act up and act out. In other words, they show you how they're feeling, and they do it with their bad behavior. I think you'll find that if you look at the statistics for the calls that we get on Family Lives, the helpline calls, and the approaches to our on our email requests, and the face-to-face and our courses, again and again, the biggest section is about children's bad behavior, often teenagers, sometimes violent, but it's about discipline and bad behavior, and frequently it's from stepfamilies. And I think that is about, as I said, it's showing you need to sort of dive under bad behavior, because bad behavior is about feelings. It's about, I feel bad and I don't think anybody's really listening to me, or I don't even maybe, I can't put it into words myself, but I'm going to show it. And children will misbehave. They will fight. They will be abusive. They will refuse to do their chores. They will do all sorts of things. But whatever they're doing, often what this is about is the family thing. They're acting in a sense as the barometers. They're the lightning rods to show you when a family is having trouble and coming under pressure. Children's behavior actually shows it. And in a lot of stepfamilies, this is what is going on. It's it's not that they need more discipline. What they actually need, perhaps, is the understanding that they're trying to tell you something. And it's about the loss of control, the lack of control over what's happening in their life, and how very unhappy they are about it. So, if you're in a stepfamily, what do you need to make it work? Well, I think number one is understanding about the unfinished business, the baggage, and all the other common stepfamily issues, that they do affect you. I think it's very understandable when you're in a stepfamily often. I mean, I know I'm like this. I didn't necessarily label myself as a stepfamily. I'm family. My family happens to be me and my husband with our son, who used to come and stay with us, and now my granddaughter, who comes and stays with us, and we see a lot. But that, to me, we're a family. And it's quite interesting to sort of step sideways and suddenly say, oh, actually, we're a stepfamily. And once you can say that, you can start realizing that there are all these common issues that, as I said, are about the situation. They're not about you. They're not about one person being evil or selfish or demanding or unreasonable, any of those things. It's about people normally reacting to a particular situation, which is difficult. And I think if you can understand that, if you can talk it through, if you can go to people who will understand it, such as coming to Family Lives. I mean, talking on the helpline, talking on the forums, looking at the courses that we offer, the counselling online or on the phone that we offer, where you can talk through and actually put your finger on, oh, that's why that's happening. I really do find, I mean, I wouldn't, I'm a counsellor because I believe that when you can point to an issue and say, now I understand why this is happening. It doesn't make it go away. It's not a magic wand that makes it go away. But it's incredibly powerful to make you feel, phew, it's not my fault and it's not their fault. It's about the situation. Okay, now let's look for a solution. And just the understanding that's what it's about actually can make you feel a lot better and make it easier. I think you also, in a step family, actually as in any family, you need to make time for yourself. We have a rather nice analogy, which is what we call the full cup, which is that if you're sitting there, nice afternoon, feet up in front of the fire, in the wet and the cold that we've been having lately, and you've got a full cup of coffee in your hand, and somebody comes up to you and says, oh, can I have some of that? And it's full to the brim. You can say, yes, of course you can. Have a little. Have a big sip. It doesn't matter. There's plenty for me. There's plenty for you. Well, if that cup is half full and somebody comes up to you and says, give me a sip, you say, well, yeah, okay, but you can't take too much because that'll leave me with nothing. You're sitting there with an empty cup and somebody comes up and you have to say, no, sorry, none for you because there's none for me. There's none for either of us. All gone. There's nothing there. And you have to look at yourself, actually, see yourself as the cup that needs to be filled. Because if you're having issues in your family, if you've got a partner where there's problems that you need to talk through, if you've got kids, whether your kids, your partner's kids, whatever, who are having a hard time of it, if your cup is empty, you're not going to be able to deal with it because you're going to just feel so tired and awful and depleted. If your cup is full, you're able to take a deep breath and be generous and be relaxed and give of yourself. So I think one of the important things to make a step family work is to make time for yourself, bit of me time for yourself as a couple, not just as people, parents as it were looking out and step parents looking after children, but as a couple doing your own thing, because then you can have time and energy to be able to help the people around you. Whether that's children who are living with you full-time, children who are with you part-time, children who, as I said, you hardly ever see. And just on that, I don't know whether I'm going to fit it in later on, but I will sort of say, by the way, that I think it's incredibly important to use the technology we have at our own, fingertips at the moment to keep connections with all the people who are around you. I've mentioned that, in some step families, obviously, you don't see those children very often, but you can be in touch with them all the time. And I would encourage anybody in a step family situation to text, email, Facebook, whatever, to actually touch base with the children you're not living with all the time. That's really, really important. It's the one occasion where I would say actually permissible, shall we say, for even primary school children to have mobile phones so that they can ring and be rung by the non-resident parent anytime. The other thing that's, I think, really important to make a family work, to keep it going, is to share the childcare, share the family chores. Now, again, as Tamara said, I think there's been an improvement, there's been a change in society in that men do take, far more of an active part in their family now than they used to. I used to get letters from stepmothers who would complain about the fact that when their stepchildren came to stay, they were the ones who were expected to do everything because dad was still off, either at work or doing his own thing, because childcare is for women. I think that has really, really changed now. But it is also important, I think, to share it. But that also means actually sometimes having time on your own. So it's important for families, children who are not there all the time, to spend time with a parent on their own. Even when you're living with that child, to spend time with them on their own. Step family, step mum, step dad time, as well as mum or dad time with the kids. And also family chores. Now, again, I see so often that parents sort of feel, these kids have had such a hard time. I mustn't sort of make any demands of them. I've got to sort of make it easy for them. And so I don't insist on their doing chores. Well, that actually is not a good idea, because one of the things about doing chores, for a start, if you're having to do it all, you feel tired and resentful, and that actually shows in what's going on in the family. But doing chores actually means you buy in to running that family, and that's absolutely vital. So that I remember the time, originally when my stepson used to come and stay with us, I'd do everything for him. I'd even go and get him a drink out the fridge. And all of a sudden I thought, oh no. And I started saying, well, go and get it yourself, or oh, by the way, can you clean that, or how about you making supper tonight? That's when he was a 10-year-old. And he rose to it, and it meant he felt that our home was his home. And that's one of the reasons why I think sharing chores is really important, because you buy into it. It makes you actually part of the decision-making process. It makes that house yours, and that's important in step families. And I think the other thing is about talking over family issues. If you leave it till the argument, it's always a bad time to try and sort something out important when everybody's shouting because everybody's unhappy. What is a far better way is have regular family round tables, I call them. Regular times when you all sit around a table together and you say, okay, we've got an issue here. Not necessarily a problem, just something, how are we going to work this? Everybody chip in. Let me have everybody say what they like. Now let's talk it through and see what's the best thing. If there's an argument going on, what's going on here? What should everybody want to happen? What do I want? What do you want? What do I need? What do you need? How are we going to sort this out? And getting into the habit of having that sort of thing. Again, it makes you a family, but it also sorts those issues, and it shows children that there are solutions to be found rather than arguments to be had. So what do children need to make a step family work? I think above all they need patience. You need to recognize that just as you probably got there over a period of time, it was a process that got you there. In other words, the original family broke down over a period, which leaves people hurt, traumatized. It's going to take a bit of time to build that up. It's going to take a bit of time for step parent and children to get on, to overcome, in a sense, that natural instinctive feeling of they're not mine, to actually build up a relationship and you can find your own relationship which can work. And it can work. I mean, I don't have children of my own. I have a stepson. He is my son. I'm not his mother, but he is my son. But that wasn't how I felt in the beginning. It was something that we came to, and we did come to it. And I think if you can give it time, even if it's not necessarily that you feel the child is a son or a daughter, but you become parental towards it. You are a caring adult. That's the important thing. But you need to be patient with them, understand the fact that they can act up and be absolutely awful, but there are reasons for it. Be adult. Take a deep breath and go with it. And I think the next thing they need, therefore, is reassurance. They need to be told, in a sense, that you understand. I can see that. And there's some lovely phrases that it sounds like. I can see that. I would imagine that. I wonder if. So what you're feeding back to them is the fact that you can see that they're having a tough time, and you can imagine what it probably is about, but would they like to talk to you about it? But you're reassuring them that they're actually worthy. So what you're not doing is saying, there's a problem here and it's you, or there's a problem here and it's your fault. There is a problem here. How are we going to do something about it? But to reassure them that, I don't expect you to give unconditional love to a child who is not your own immediately. But you certainly can give unconditional reassurance, I think. And you can give attention. And that's just so important. And I referred before to the idea of having, private time so that you can do things as a family, do things as, mother and child, father and child, stepmom and child, stepfather and child. Giving children that attention, listening to them, talking with them, letting them talk, letting them tell you, respecting them. That's really, really important. And one of the ways you can do this is sitting around a table and having dinner. I think that is so important. We really need to be sitting around tables and having dinner together, having a meal together, and giving children that attention. And giving them choices and responsibility. Again, back to the chores, that gives them responsibility. I expect you to do this. I'm trusting you to do this. But giving them choices. How would you like to do this? What do you think? So on things like contact, talk to the children and ask them. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do what they want, but actually giving them, the opportunity to voice it and giving them some choice. And, it can be actually down to sort of things like, what sort of pet we're going to have. Some choices, any choice gives children the feeling of control, and that can give them back something that they may feel they've lost tremendously in a step-family situation. And, of course, some contact. And as I said, contact doesn't have to be face-to-face, although face-to-face is good. But if you give children time, but if you also give them internet time, email time, text help, text time, anything like that, that keeps making that connection, that contact is just so important. And you look for help. There are places on the internet. There are places that are really special for kids, one called thesite.org. There is Family Lives for anybody in the family situation. Ask for the help. It's there because so many people actually could do it and make use of it. It's a strength. It's a sign of strength to look for help. Do come for it, because that's what we're there for. And finally, this is my reminder that, as I've said, that families come in all shapes and sizes, and this is my reminder of it. If you'd like to have a look at that. When did you last see your father? You mean my donor father? My birth father? Or my stepfather? There you go. They're probably even more than that. But that's the point. I think we are all members of different sizes of families, different shapes of families. It's all normal, but just some may need a little bit more help and a little bit more support than others, and that's what Family Lives is here for. So, Jimmy, thank you. It'd be lovely to hear if anybody wants to make any comments or ask any questions.
Yeah, I'm just coming back online now. I hope you can hear me.
Right, Jimmy, I can hear you.
I should also have pointed out at the beginning that there may be a slight time delay. Oh, you can hear me. I was going to say there might be a slight time delay because we get little glitches along the way, and they can accumulate, and sometimes it's a minute or two after you've finished speaking that people actually hear the end of what you're saying. So thank you. That was really fascinating, really interesting, and it actually reminded me of a lot of my own experiences, which was fascinating. Although I joined a step family as an adult, I was already 25, I think, when I became somebody's stepson and somebody's stepbrother. But still, really interesting to hear all of that. And thank you, Simon, for saying that was excellent. I thought so too. So we're all here. Susie and Tamara are both available for questions. Maria, Sheena, Simon, you've all been very quiet there. But we would love to hear from you, and you know we're here for a chat if you'd like to ask anything. So we'll keep the room open. We'll hang on. And I'm going to stop yammering and stalling now. I said earlier today that I would speak for 1 minute, and I think I spoke for about 5.5 minutes at the start, and I've probably just done 2 minutes now and not really said anything. I'm going to do my best to shut up.
I tell you what, I've got a question for Tamara. This is what I would really like Tamara to answer.
Okay.
In the old days, and I certainly still get letters about this, people ask about adopting stepchildren. What's the situation nowadays about that?
Well, it's quite unusual. You can, since 2005, December 2005, I think, step-parents can acquire something called parental responsibility, which is the package of rights and duties that most parents have in any event in relation to their children. And step-parents can acquire them. But only with everybody else's agreement. So only if if mum and dad agree, which isn't always that easy. The cases that I've worked on where step parent has acquired parental responsibility, for instance, has been where the father really isn't a big part of the picture, and the step parent has really stepped into the shoes of father and become, de facto parent. And in those cases, sometimes the biological father will agree to the stepfather having parental responsibility. But adoption is quite rare because adoption actually takes away parental responsibility from the biological father. And obviously
Exactly.
that's quite a draconian outcome for biological dad.
Yeah, that was my understanding, because lots of people can have parental responsibility, can't they? You can, as you said, that the biological father can have it at the same time as a stepfather having it. It's quite important for step parents to sometimes have these. I mean, I suddenly realized, years and years ago this would have been. I remember being with my stepson Alex and him falling and cutting himself quite badly, and I took him to hospital. And I only afterwards realized, in fact, that I was damn lucky, because strictly speaking, They could have said, you know, you have no right to bring this child in because this child is nothing to you. You're a stranger. You are not in loco parentis because you're not a teacher. You know, you're not a social. You're nothing. And but as it was, they didn't. Maybe I was just so confident. They assumed he was mine.
It is a really, really common argument for step-parents saying we need parental responsibility, because that is pretty much the only occasion when parental responsibility might be an issue. But the reality is, in the days of technology nowadays, if permission is needed, sometimes it's not needed. Based on child's best interest at that moment in time, and they don't even think about asking who's got parental responsibility, who's going to sign this form. But even if they usually all of the parents have the access even by mobile phone, so it's not a particularly good argument for step parents having to have parental responsibility. Simon said that he's probably in a slightly different situation after he disappeared, and then he found her 7 years later. Goodness me, that's that's a really, really hard situation for you, Simon, having to re-establish that contact after such a long time. I'm really glad that you persevered, and I know that your daughter will be. But yes, that's really difficult, visiting her once a month. But
I would say, but yes, he's not stepfamily. You're not Simon. You're her father.
Dad, yeah.
That's it. You are her father. You might be a father who is not had contact, and it would be very. I mean, it's going to be hard. Rebuilding that relationship. Although, funnily enough, I mean, I would think she's still, she's got no reason to feel that obviously any child is going to feel slightly abandoned, although children actually feel that it's, horribly, they tend to feel it's their fault or something like that. They tend not to sort of think in terms of, yeah. But I think you're the outside family, but you're not the step family.
Yeah. I think she's 9 now. She will probably, as an adult, remember you as being always there. And the fact that you worked so hard to get the contact back up and running in the longer term will stand you in really good stead. So thank you for persevering, I'm sure.
Simon, do you see her now then? Once a month, you say? Once a month, yeah.
And is that going to move on, Simon? Have you got plans to increase that so that she can come and visit you? I'm assuming you're in England, but I might be wrong. Because obviously, for a couple of years, you might be, certainly legally, you might be in a position where you could start saying, well, actually, I'd like to extend it. I'd like to move this to long periods of time or more regularly, depending on what the circumstances allow.
This is also back to my argument about using technology, because again, what a difference, even what a difference from 7 years ago, that we now have access so easily to think, mobile phones, laptops, tablets, all those sorts of things where you can have Skype chat, like as we're having. Right, she's a mirror image of her mother's anger that I have found her.
Oh.
Yeah. I hope you're getting, Simon, I do hope you're getting support. Mind you, Ireland. I do hope you're getting support, not just for your feelings about this, but to try and move on what is being done with her and her mother. Now, I don't know if you saw, there was a case reported in today's and yesterday's paper of a family judge who actually decided that the mother's action in training her children to hate their father, the father who the judge accepted had actually done nothing to deserve this, resulted in her being such a poor example that he actually took the children away from the mother and has given residence to the father. So I think the point is that this parental alienation, and Tamara can come on this, parental alienation, the way of, making a child feel the anger that the parents has, is now recognized as being quite abusive. And I would rather hope that there might be people over there, yeah, exactly, PAS, exactly, that there may be people that you can get involved with the family who will help her to see that she is harming her child by doing this, and to desist, or indeed, possibly have questions raised as to whether, only once a month is acceptable.
I agree. I mean, there is this case reported recently, and I have to say I've seen it happen myself. There was a case that I was involved in our local court, and Mum was so anti-contact and put up barriers that in the end, the circuit judge, after several attendances at court, the circuit judge said, "Look, if the only way these 3 children are going to see their father is if they live with him, or see both parents is if they live with dad, that's what I'm going to order. So either, Mum, they stay living with you, but you have to make them available for contact and good contact, or I'm going to change the residence completely so that they live with dad, because dad has promised that he would make them available for contact with you." And she made that order. Mother was warned. She clearly didn't believe it, and it is, I have to say, I mean, this was probably 4 years ago, and at the time it was unusual, it was surprising, but
Wow.
that's the order she made. She switched the residence to dad because she could see that the damage that was being done to those 3 children in being alienated from, and I refer back to something Susie said earlier, half of them, they see themselves, they very often perceive themselves as half of the person that is being raged against. And so they take it very personally. And she switched the residence, and that's how it stayed. So it is identified and picked up by the court more and more, the damage that the very implacably hostile, is the legal phrase that is often bandied about, implacably hostile mothers to contact. That can really come back and reverse it.
It is abusive, and I think
It's
whichever side. Sorry, Tamara, go on.
It's fine. I finished.
No, I was going to say it is abusive, and whichever side, whichever parent is continuing their argument with the other parent through their children, they are harming their children. We have a lovely phrase in Family Lives, actually, which is "love your children more than you hate each other." And
that's good. I like that.
Exactly, and I think that's a motto to keep. And I do wonder whether this is something that Simon, you might like to take up. You might like to have an extended phone call, for instance, with somebody, one of our call takers. You might like to certainly follow this through with a solicitor about whether the case can be put to the mother, that this is harming not just your relationship with your child, but harming the child. And indeed, eventually, actually, the relationship of the child with her mother. Because one of these days she might turn around and suddenly say, hang on, what did you do to me and why did you do that? That I think that sometimes, when mothers, if this is put to the parent who's being difficult, and perhaps a bit of mediation or indeed counselling is offered, it might make a difference. I think that what is, and I'm sure that Tamara is going to confirm this, I think that what has happened is that we had a law change some years ago which took it from being custody that was being fought over. In other words, the child as a parcel to be fought over by the parents who are the right to have that child. I think that that has changed, that there is now far more towards the idea that it is the child that is really important. that that the child's well-being is the thing it was. And I can see what you said, Simon, that court action held in Ireland, I don't think they recognise PAS over there. Well, that's why I sort of said, let's not be too. I mean, I've just been watching Philomena and thinking, oh goodness, the Irish and their understanding of children and parents. But no, things have changed enormously. Things have changed all over in the recognition of children's, I'd say children's rights, but the children are the ones that actually, it's their well-being that we should be looking at. And I think more and more solicitors and obviously people who work with children and work with parents are recognizing that actually it's the children's well-being that's paramount and should remain paramount. I just think it might be worthwhile. I mean, I can see you saying that, but it might be worthwhile pursuing it. Tamara.
No, well, I was just going to say, I think there's a lot more shared information worldwide, really. We're always watching other countries and how they deal with these difficult issues and trying to share best practice. So, we've been following the Australian model very closely to see whether shared parenting, given as a starting point, is best way to start before we're implementing any law to that effect here. So I do think, and I know that the Irish solicitors do, very much follow what's happening in England. So you may well find they're behind the curve or that they have a different approach, but you may find that in the same way as the law has tried really hard to keep up with the real reality that there are a lot of children out there who are in relationships are fractured, and that the long-term consequences are only really being identified now as to how those children then go on and form their own relationships, what the role modelling is, and so the courts are really, really focused on trying to get it right. So you may find that whatever best practices here, is ultimately shared in Ireland. I hope that's the case.
Yeah. Sheena, very interesting question. How do you respond to a dad who is so wrapped up in his new relationship that he has lost interest in his children? New family more important than old. And I can absolutely see that again. It's a very, very common situation. It's part of what I was saying about the second chance, that sometimes what happens is that somebody will leave a relationship and go into a new one and think, phew, I'm going to do so much better here, and actually concentrate on being really good dads, in fact, in their in the new relationship, because they feel they have failed in the last. And the more they get into that, sometimes the feelings are that I failed before. I don't want to face that, because I was a failure in that relationship. So I don't want to face up to that, and that's difficult and it's painful. And of course it always is painful, as I said, when you see people, that when you have a short period of time with somebody that you're not living with, towards the end it always gets a bit fractious, and that always is stressful and it's painful and it's guilt making. And so every time he did see his children, it would actually end up with his feeling bad about himself. And so, yes, he turns to his new one because he feels good about himself in there. What do you do about it? I think for a start, you trust the fact that he is not oblivious to this. He is perhaps taking the easy route, but I don't think he's utterly oblivious, and I don't think he's forgotten. I don't think he has lost interest or forgotten his children. It's that becomes hard and painful. And what perhaps he needs to be faced with is, maybe it is hard and painful, but you have to do it, because that's what adults do. These children are yours, they love you, they miss you, they are part of you, you are part of them. And perhaps this can be done in a letter or an invitation to come and talk with a mediator. We've found, and again, Tamara will back me up on this, particularly it's being used very much in family law now. Asking people to go to mediation can be absolutely transformational. You don't realize how powerful it can be. Sorry, when you can sit across a table with someone, knowing that you can't argue because there's somebody there who's sort of refereeing and holding the line, as it were, but you can say what you feel, but in a way that doesn't wound, but does actually get those things out, and listen to what the other person is saying. So what I would say is, I might write him a letter to say, you know, your kids miss you. I think you'll feel bad about yourself if you don't make the effort to keep in touch. Yes, it's hard, but you know that's what life is all about. But also, can we talk about it at this place and in this time in a way that is not going to lead to an argument? It's going to lead to us finding a solution together, and that's what mediation does. It's not, you know, nobody gets blamed, nobody gets helped. It's absolutely objective, and it might allow him to come and, you know, in a sense, dump his feelings, but actually work out, you know, work towards something. Tamara, do you think that would work?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think I do agree. Mediation is phenomenally helpful, and I'm not a mediator, but I do something called collaborative law, which is very similar insofar as we sit with both husband and wife, and they're separated and agree that we're going to sort it out round the table. And there's nowhere to hide. You have to hear the consequences of your behaviour, and it's very, very powerful. And I think people make all sorts of presumptions about why the other is behaving a certain way,
Mm.
and sitting around the table quite often blows the lid off these myths and allows, you know, some dialogue to be had. But I would also say I don't know how long ago, Sheena, it is since you separated. So I think that also can have an impact. I think, you know, shortly afterwards, everything, as Susie said, everything connected with the breakup is so raw. All the communication is very difficult, and it is easier to walk away. But if you don't mind me, just telling you a little bit about my own story. My parents divorced. My dad, he basically couldn't cope with the hole that was left, and so he moved. Now, objectively, at the time, it was like, why is he leaving? Why is he leaving us? The reality is, it was just he was running away from the hole, and my mother worked incredibly hard to make us not feel that there was a hole there. And through gritted teeth, I know, in retrospect, uh, really, really worked hard to make sure that we always felt that he was interested. It was circumstances rather than choice that meant he was working overseas. So that when he did feel able to come back into our lives, we hadn't written him off, we hadn't made assumptions, and we hadn't we didn't need to even forgive him because we didn't feel there's anything to forgive. And trying to just keep that sort of shield over for the benefit of the children and not make them feel rejected. You know, my mum used to write cards on his behalf, all sorts of things. And in the long term, I can't tell you how grateful we are to our mother for doing that, because it allowed us to have a long and excellent relationship with our dad when he was ready to come back. But really, he'd gone off to lick his wounds, and it might feel very selfish, but you know, emotions make you behave in ways that might look back in hindsight and think, "Oh, I could have done that differently." So I think that's what I would say is he might he might not be rejecting them. He might just feel so hurt by what has happened, and not by being able to go to bed every night and all sorts of other things that it's time to reconcile what's happened.
Yes, and we've seen what you said. Thanks. Good to see why I might behave like this rather than just blame him. I think that's the point. It's and this is my whole, you know, as a counsellor, what I do all the time is that I think if you can understand, as Tamara has said, sometimes we make up the script. We think we know why people have done things. Actually, sometimes giving them the opportunity to tell you does help. It may be different, but even if he is just being an idiot and being cowardly, actually just being able to explain that and face up to it helps you and helps him and helps the kids. I don't know how old your children are. Sometimes, you know, they're being able to say, look, we'd like to see our half brother or sister. You know, actually, we'd rather like that. That may enable him to see that he should make that connection and should make that contact.
I don't know if there
Any
are
other
questions.
questions? Yeah,
One of
any
the
other
things that,
questions?
just if I can ask a question, Susie, just when you were
Mm.
talking, you mentioned the benefit of children having one-to-one time with either the parent or the absent parent or the, I know that's a terrible phrase, it's a very legal phrase, the absent parent, but the
Yeah.
parent that doesn't live there all the time. or the stepmother or stepfather. I mean, is there any research on that, the importance of that? Because I know that we find it very difficult to do, even in a nuclear normal, there's a terrible word, even in a straightforward family, you know, mum, dad, two kids living under the same roof. We don't always make time for our children one-to-one in those circumstances.
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
more important in a family where there are a new set of norms?
I would say it probably is, although I'd also actually say I think it's incredibly important in any family. I do think children benefit enormously, and you're quite right. I don't think I can point to research. I can't. I don't know if there is any, but I can certainly say anecdotal evidence and in my experience that when children have special time with one parent, for a start, what they start seeing is that parent as a person, not just mum or dad. They see them as Vic and Suz. My stepson always used to call me Suz. That they see you as a person, which means they also then understand you are you're fallible, you're human, you can be hurt, you can be pleased, all those sorts of things that actually are rather good for children to recognize about parents. And parents actually then making the individual connection with their children rather than the kids. So often I think we rather have this idea that they are children rather than they're absolute individuals, and we need to deal with them in different ways. And I think making that connection in any family is really important. But yes, in a step family where you are dealing with jealousies, perhaps feelings of loss, feelings of competition, if you can have the step parent and the child having time together, that builds up their own relationship, their own connection, which is incredibly important. But also, since part of the jealousy would be you came in and took my father or mother away from me, actually having sanctioned time alone with mum or dad rather than having to fight for it is really important and very healing. So as I said, I can't point to a study, but I can certainly point to my own experience and anecdotal evidence that it does make a difference. It is very much a good thing. It's a good idea.
Yes, I think I am aware of it anecdotally, but nothing further. But
yeah,
yes,
that's a good point that Jimmy says. Yeah, more of a gained family member to the child. I love the phrase chosen adult, which is one I use a lot, which is that I think all children do have people that they, outside the family or, in the wider family, whom they choose as somebody who has a connection to them. My grandmother was my chosen adult. And I think that if you are seeing your step parent as an addition rather than somebody who's supplanting. I mean, again, looking at my own situation, Alex always said that he was brought up by three people, a mother, a dad, and me, and that I was there, therefore very much he would never have wanted me not to be there. I was very much a gain in his life, and I think that's it. That's what we're looking for. We're not looking for to be supplanting. Certainly you should never try and take over the position of a mother or a father if you're a stepmother or a father. Even if that person is dead, you are not going to become them. You're going to be a step parent always. Children have have two birth parents, and that's it. And you're in addition. But that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with being an extra. And somebody I like that phrase, Jimmy, a gained family member to the child. That's a good one. Yeah. And time alone actually really does that.
It's a phrase that's come to me just based on my own experience, where you talked a lot about the baggage that I thought I think I'm in a lucky situation because the baggage of the two families put together is the same baggage. It's both families have lost a parent through death, and then there's been a remarriage, and so two siblings become one set of four siblings. We all completely understand each other's history. We've all gone through that bereavement process, and then now that we're in that situation, we've gained people. So out of what was a horrible situation, it's kind of the best of the parent.
That's right.
And so it is, I think, probably easier to see it as a gain when the people on the other side of that situation are carrying the same problem. That makes sense.
Yep.
So yeah, perhaps trickier when it's two completely different situations where
been a separation or two separations, one separation and one bereavement. And there's going to be a lot of that to work through. I think a lot of things it's going to be harder to see it as a game than kind of what are you doing here where someone else should have been.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I think it's I mean, I think we have to recognise that we're getting more and more common. That step families are, families do come in all shapes and sizes nowadays. It is no longer, you can't talk about the traditional family anymore, because I think the figures are showing actually that, mum and dad who marry as their first relationship and have children and stay together for the rest of their lives is no longer the majority. It's not that they're the minority, but the point is that there are, other forms of families that are just as valid in the sense of people, as I said. I mean, I define a family as people connected to each other who care for each other and look out for each other. And they can be in the same situation, they can be living separately, they can be they can be related. There are all sorts of ways that we can be families, and I think we just need to recognize that that means we have to find some new solutions to some of the problems, because those situations, if we continue to see families as the traditional idea, a family can only be to people who are related to each other, that's when you trip over the problems, the stuff that's underneath the carpet that forms the bump. And it's that we have to recognize there are differences, voice those differences, and perhaps ask for a bit of help in dealing with them and finding solutions rather than finding the problems all the time.
Absolutely. Well, we've slightly gone over our time, so I think unless there are any other pressing questions, I think we'd better start to wrap up. Thank you very much to Susie and Tamara for being here and talking so knowledgeably and for answering those questions. But thank you also to our participants. There were only a few of you, but you've been absolutely wonderful, and it's really great that you've been able to share your stories and to talk about that. And I think it's useful for us to hear what each other want to ask.